David Greely, Chief Economist at Abex Technologies. David is at Abex Technologies, where his team is preparing to launch a next generation commodities futures exchange and clearinghouse through Abex Exchange in Singapore. He's also the host of Smarter Markets podcast, and he used to be a portfolio strategist at Ray Diallo's Bridgewater Associates, and he served as chief commodity strategist and head of energy research at Goldman Sachs. David, would you like to join us?
So thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, Peter, for giving me this opportunity to speak with all of you today. And thank you for giving me this fantastic time slot right after lunch when we've all been fed, but we're not groggy yet. So I'll try to make it quick and save some time for my other speakers. What I really wanted to talk with everyone about today is one of the seriously nice things about having this slot in the afternoon is we've all heard so many great ideas throughout the morning. You know, you hear from technology people, hear from investors, hear from engineers and entrepreneurs. And it really brings home the fact that climate change and the transition to a net zero economy is a global challenge, which means it affects all of us. It's all of our problem, and it requires all of our efforts. But how are we to coordinate and align those efforts? That's what I want to talk with you about for a few minutes this afternoon, because we need to find ways to get all of us rowing the boat in the same direction if we're going to get to the net zero future. And at Abex, we believe that accomplishing the energy transition to a net zero economy requires engaging market forces and market mechanisms to help align all of our efforts. But first, we need those markets to deliver the right signals. So we're working together, not at cross purposes with each other. Much of the scale of the problem we face with the carbon emissions since the start of the industrial era is because of the economic nature of pollution. It's an externality. You know, for most of the industrial era, it's been free to emit carbon. And so like anything else that's free, we all do too much of it. And so what we need now is to basically be able to put a price on carbon so that the impact to the decision maker is the same as the impact to all of us. And so we need a price, and I think a price is better than a tax when we look at ways to coordinate, because a tax is really there to discourage, whereas the price can also encourage. It can pay people to come up with interesting ideas and new and novel ways, innovative technologies to pull carbon out of the atmosphere or to help reduce it. It also aligns everyone's interests, so we just don't need a few big players making reductions. We can get everyone to contribute their part. And so as we look to price this externality, we want to be able to find ways in order to get that price to be discovered in a liquid, transparent market rather than set by a government. But we need more than just a spot market. We need a futures market with a forward curve. And why is that? Well, because we want to allow not only the discovery of the price of carbon today, but the price of carbon that the market expects a year from now, 5 years from now, et cetera. And even more importantly, because we want to be able to unlock the investment capital that's going to finance so many of the great ideas for carbon reduction and removals. I think the US natural gas market is a great example of this. You know, a lot of people, looking to reduce carbon probably aren't too happy with the success of fracking in the United States. But if you look at what paid for that development of those natural gas fields, much of it was done by small producers being able to lay off their risk on a futures exchange. And because they were able to de-risk their projects, they were able to raise the investment capital they needed to develop those fields and produce the gas that's currently been using. And if you look just the past year, post the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the US became the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas to help Europe get through its winter. And so what we see that the market mechanism that we need first is a real futures market that will unlock investment capital for carbon reduction and removal projects. But attaining carbon neutrality requires more than just a carbon market. It requires building markets to support the energy transition, including LNG, liquefied natural gas, carbon, and battery metals. So I was just curious, who in this room has heard of liquefied natural gas? So that's pretty much everybody. Who heard of it 3 years ago? All right, it's pretty good. So one of the things that you see is, when people talk about the energy transition, it really means that we're going to have a sea change in the types of commodities we're using to power our society and, power our economy. And the conventional wisdom on the energy transition is that it means widespread electrification powered by low carbon renewables. And that means that the commodities that we're going to need to support our economy in the future are very different from the ones that we've used in the past. We're going to need liquefied natural gas so that gas can flow to areas that are currently dependent on coal, many of those in Asia. Basically, if you use gas to generate electricity rather than coal, you cut your carbon emissions roughly in half. So it's a great transition fuel as we move to a low carbon future. And we need to pay the price on carbon, and we need to create all those batteries that we're going to need for the electric vehicles, not to mention the copper to build out the grids so that we can charge all those electric vehicles. And so we need a very different commodity mix than we've seen in the past. So when we look at what we're going to have in the future, and people often ask me, looking at the commodity markets, where are we today? What does it feel like? Often people will say, oh, this is like the 2000s, the last time commodity prices, went to high levels. I think we're really more like in the beginning of the 1980s. So at the beginning of the 1980s, you saw a lot of the energy markets deregulating, and markets that we take for granted today. Like if you open the newspaper or, turn on the news and see, oh, the price of oil did this today. The price of oil they're talking about is typically the WTI futures contract traded on the CME. Or the Brent contract that delivers into Sullom Voe in the North Sea. If you look at the price of natural gas, it's the Henry Hub contract for delivery in Louisiana. So we've had these benchmark contracts for the energy industry that what will be the benchmarks of the next era? What will be the price we look at when we want to see what the price of energy is? And we think that will be the price of liquefied natural gas, which will set the price for natural gas in the global market. And we think it will also, we'll want to know the prices of the battery metals. We'll want to know the price of carbon. And carbon has the capacity to be the largest commodity market of all. And so this is all happening now. The reason I asked you about who had heard of LNG 3 years ago, when we started this project of developing a new commodities futures exchange, it was pretty niche. And now, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the price spikes in Europe over the past year in terms of natural gas, it's become front page news when people talk about energy security. And so what we're looking to do is to help develop those benchmark contracts that the world's going to need. The European Union has been struggling to introduce a new way to price LNG that's reflective of the price consumers face in Europe. It's pretty interesting, if you look at the price of the benchmark futures contract in Europe, the TTF contract, the difference between that price of gas in a pipeline in the Netherlands and the price of gas on a ship offshore has been over $20 an MMBTU at many points in time this winter. The price of gas in the US was well below $10 an MMBTU. So the difference, the mispricing between the benchmarks they have and the gas they're using has often been 2 to 3 times the size of what we pay for gas in the United States. Those are tremendous risks, and they need to be dealt with. So while market infrastructure is not always the most exciting thing for people to discuss, I think you definitely miss it when it's gone. You've seen that with the LME, with the explosion on the nickel contract and the ensuing chaos over the past year. You've seen it this past weekend with Silicon Valley Bank. When the infrastructure we rely on stops working, it grinds our life to a halt. And so we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. However, markets just don't happen. They need to be built. And at Abex Exchange, we're building the markets and market infrastructure to support the energy transition. We're preparing to launch Abex Exchange, a full stack commodity futures exchange and clearinghouse that'll be regulated by the Monetary Authority in Singapore. And we'd just like to pause for one moment because my colleague who couldn't be here would be upset with me if I didn't. But I would just ask you to keep in mind that the word exchange has been overused and misused in recent years. So when you hear me refer to a futures exchange and clearinghouse, it's fully regulated. Please think CME, ICE, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, Intercontinental Exchange. Don't think crypto exchange or FTX. Very different things. So that's all I ask, if you remember one thing. And so we're focused on commodities vital to the energy transition, with physically delivered contracts and an exchange that'll act as the buyer and seller of last resort to all participants and dedicated to meeting the commercial needs of the market. We'll be starting with launching new benchmark futures contracts in LNG, carbon, and battery metals. And we've worked with groups in the industry, often of the major producers, consumers, and traders over the past 3 years to make sure that these will meet their needs. The exchange will also increasingly incorporate the emerging technologies being developed for trading and clearing by Abex Technologies, which is a publicly listed company trading on NEO as Abex and the OTC markets as Abex XF. And this is because we don't just need new markets to support the energy transition, we need smarter markets. We need to be able to differentiate commodities by the environmental and social impact of their production and transportation so that these attributes can also be priced by the marketplace. The provenance of commodities should be tracked in a trusted way so that low carbon and socially responsible commodities are able to price at a premium. And so smarter markets is our vision for how to do this, of incorporating the latest technology in terms of distributed ledger and blockchain technology so that we can track whether a ton of copper was produced in a socially responsible way using low carbon fuels, or was it produced in an irresponsible way in a highly pollutive way? Because until producers can get paid to produce in a high quality way, you're not going to get enough production. And it would be terrible if the energy transition to get off fossil fuels just meant that we were doing more damage as we mine the minerals that we're going to need to move to a low carbon future. And so smarter markets is our vision, as well as the name of our weekly podcast, which I host. We have a little booth set up in the corner, so I'm going to give that a quick plug. The point of the podcast is to bring together a community of practical problem solvers, entrepreneurs and engineers, commodity practitioners, and technologists who can talk and listen and find ways to make progress on the transition to a net zero economy. And we'd like all of you, over the course of the 2 days here, we're going to have a little booth set up where we'd like people to record and share their experience of what they've learned, what's changed their mind, who they've met, and we'll be putting that out on social media and our podcast as well. So our view is really finding a way to help us all work together better to build markets that can help us coordinate all these activities and move towards a net zero future. For our part at Abex Exchange, we're working on creating better benchmarks, better technology, and better tools for risk management focused on the commercial needs of the market, so the market's supported in meeting the needs of the energy transition. So thank you very much to Scott and Peter and all of you. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for David?
Hi, Luda Siegel from Constellation. So I'm very interested in your commodity exchange. So are you going to trade regular contracts as well, or this will be all, like you mentioned, like Henry Hub or LNG, right? Are those going to be socially responsible produced Henry Hub futures?
So, well, we're introducing our commodity futures contracts. So like a Henry Hub contract is for natural gas, we're introducing them for LNG, for carbon, and for battery metals to start. Our focus is at first on the energy transition commodities because we think they're the most important. In a commodities market, the first thing you need to do to make it successful is to create liquidity. So we're not putting stringent standards on it needs to meet X, Y, and Z standard, but we are creating ways for participants that wish to be able to associate the contract they're buying with carbon offsets if they want. So that they can push through a carbon neutral version of the product that they're buying and selling. And then with the technology we're developing over time, what we want to be able to do is create ways for people to track the provenance of the commodities that they're trading So you could have, say, two versions of copper. You could have the benchmark copper contract, and you could have a copper that is socially responsibly produced according to metrics that the market finds important, that's using hydroelectric power instead of, fossil fuel and diesel. And that provenance could be tracked so that the producer would be able to pay a premium. So I think an important thing to remember in commodity markets is that what you normally want to do to get a functioning market is to create a benchmark that's liquid, and then the market will start to trade differentials relative to that. So for the example of Henry Hub, there's Henry Hub gas, but people also trade gas in the northeast of the US, in the Rockies, in California, but they'll trade those as differentials to the benchmark. I think you'll see the same thing develop when it comes to quality and ESG characteristics. And we'll provide the technology to help with that.
Some sort of green basis, right?
Yeah, you could call it a
Okay.
green basis. Yeah,
Got it.
basis or spread.
Thank you.
Sure.
We have time for one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. You're close enough. I can hear you.
Carbon and battery metals. How are you going to get your prices, your settlement prices, and whatnot? That are you bringing your own actual carbon credits or how's that?
Right. No, that's a great question because, and I think it points to one of the problems in commodity markets today is for the past 10, 15 years, most of the contracts introduced are financially settled. So they're settled against an index. We think that's the wrong approach for creating benchmark contracts, that they should be physically settled, which means that you have the right to deliver a ton of LNG, a ton of copper, a barrel of oil, what have you, against the contract. So you've actually made a real purchase. And so those markets, that's very reflective of the benchmarks that have worked historically, whether it's Henry Hub gas or WTI oil or Brent crude. And so that's what we're focused on, are physically settled. And the beauty of that as well is that creates its own pricing. Instead of being a user of spot market prices, that interaction of people trading a real thing in a real market creates pricing, which then can help understand, okay, what are the differentials? How does this greener version of it trade relative to the underlying? So that's our focus. Yeah.
The underlying on carbon.
On carbon, what we're introducing is a physically delivered nature-based contract that will be deliverable against the Vera registry. So if someone has credits on Vera under the specified methodologies in the contract, they could deliver those. In that case, it's just moving it from one registry account to another, but it still has the same economic characteristics of physical delivery. Sure.